today, well, we have Jessica Jolly on, and been really impressed with the content that I've seen out there. Jessica, you have a blog, you have a YouTube channel. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm super happy to be here. Um, I, I, Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have a little handy dandy slide prepared. Don't worry, this is not death by PowerPoint. But it just reminds me of all the points that I want to talk about. So, are you seeing the slide with my face there? Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I am a Microsoft certified trainer. This is actually a second career for me. I worked for 27 years in the corporate world, and I was a facilities manager. So I didn't have anything to do with, teaching, nothing to do with data, other than I used a lot of data. So when they moved the facilities out east, I was in Chicago. I had been training people on Microsoft Office at my local public library and really enjoyed it. And I thought, well, I'll give this a shot. And that was back at the end of 2015. So I've been going along here pretty steady. I do have a LinkedIn page, and I do actually now post on it. I used to have to say, oh no, I hardly ever post, but now I'm actually trying to make an effort. I do tweet, but it's not very often. And I do have a website which has pretty much a lot of the same content that my LinkedIn has. I split my time between the Chicago suburbs and the Maine woods. And when I am not doing things on my computer, those are a few things that I really enjoy doing. And you may notice that, it's either being outside or doing something with my hands. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm so honored to have you here on the show with us.
Well, it's my honor to be here. So, should we just jump right into this then?
Absolutely. I should probably just premise this because we might have some people that are really interested in Power BI. So I run a channel, and Kurt was actually my mentor from over 20 years ago. So I brought him full time with me here in April. And what we teach Power Apps development. And I think it's sort of sad. Some of us Power Apps people, we just don't know very much about Power BI. We know that we should be learning it. We need to integrate those in our Power Apps. But really, I think a lot of us are lost, and we just need a little bit of a guidance and almost a primer. So that's
Oh,
just.
perfect. Love it. Because if we were to flip the script, that would be me with Power Apps. I've played around with them, but I don't know too much about them. And I made a conscious decision to kind of focus in on Power BI. So, yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. And I see Michelle is there. Hi, Michelle. Welcome, welcome. All right. So, this is not a death by PowerPoint. So, if you were hoping for that, I'm sorry. I have one slide that I walk through, and then that's it. Then I'll just be demonstrating the concepts. So, but I find that anybody I teach Power BI to really needs to understand that it's an entire ecosystem. It isn't just one product, it's not just one application, it's a whole bunch of things that work together. And for that reason, it can feel, I think, Darren, you were saying before we went on, that it can feel very overwhelming. And it can be overwhelming. So, and there's Lou. Welcome, Lou. All right, so let's just jump into my one and only slide. So I always give this overview first, just so you can have a sense of what the entire thing looks like from end to end. So the first thing is to know about Power BI is that its entire purpose is to allow you to visualize data. And visualize it in a more responsive, more, I'm not going to say decorative, but more accessible way than perhaps you can in Excel. So it will connect to north of 200 sources. So you won't. most of the time you're not going to have any experience where you're not going to be able to connect to a particular set of data. Once you have connected to a source or two sources or whatever, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pull it in, and that process is called extracting and transforming. Now, normally, I have to explain those terms for a lot of people because most of the people I train are not database people. They don't have a database background. I did not have a database background. So some of those terms when I was getting started really intimidated me. But all it means, extract and transform, means you're pulling the data out of the source. Okay. And then you're going to make some changes to that data in order to make it fit for purpose. So, and I will demonstrate this. After we go through this slide, I will show you obviously a much speeded up process here.
Very
So
good.
the tool that we're going to use is called the Power Query Editor, and it is embedded in Power BI Desktop. It is also embedded in Excel, and it's also embedded in the Power BI service. So it's available from 3 different sort of entry points, if you will, but it is not a standalone tool. So it is not something that you can go out to the Microsoft Store and download. It's a tool that you access through one of the 3 ways that I just mentioned. And the whole purpose of this tool is that it allows you to make transformations to your data so that it's fit. I said fit for purpose, and that's really a good way to describe it. So the kinds of things you would do would be things like getting rid of excess columns, splitting up data. One of the things that you're doing when you're working in Power BI is you're working in what's called a tabular model. Now, that again, that was a term that kind of threw me for a loop, but all it means is your data is going to be in a table format. Okay, so just means that you're building tables that you are then going to load into the Power BI desktop. Now, the Power BI desktop is also an application. It is free, so to some extent, the kind of the barriers to entry are minimal to none as far as that goes. But the purpose of the Power BI desktop is to allow you to do 2 things. One is to model your data, and what I mean by that is create a framework that your data is going to sit inside. So if you think about a house, when you're building a house, the first thing that goes up is a frame. I mean, I guess a foundation and then a frame, but you get the idea. You cannot have a house that doesn't have a frame. I guess you could if you were having a yurt or something, but you get the idea. So you have to tell Power BI how all of the different tables that you have extracted, transformed, and loaded, how each of those tables connects to each other. And that process is called data modeling. Now, if you've ever had a database background, that process is going to sound familiar. The only big difference is that when you're working in Power BI, the ideal shape of the model is called a star schema, which is different from what the ideal shape is for a data model when you're working, let's say, with a relational database. So while knowing your data, knowing how to data model on a database, a transactional database, isn't necessarily going to be, it will help, but it's not, you can't just take what you know from a database perspective and transfer it to Power BI. It does have its own rules. Yeah, and Mary, I agree, there is an echo. It's probably because maybe Darren, if you can go on mute, maybe it was you, Mary. Anyway, so first purpose of the Power BI desktop is to help you create your data model. Then you are going to go in and you are going to build a report. Now, the thing is that reports can be multiple pages. They can be only 1 page. Each page can have 1 or more visuals on it. And you can have, really there isn't a set number of visuals per page. It all depends on performance. Okay. It all depends on how responsive your report is, how responsive your report is when a user interacts with it. So the number I give people, and again, it's just to give kind of beginners a place to start. The number the number I give people is start by thinking about 5 to 6 visuals per page and 5 to 6 pages per report. Again, not a hard and fast number, but just kind of a place to get, if you need 5 or 6 pages, obviously don't put 5 or 6 pages in if you don't need them. But again, just kind of giving you a guideline, especially as a beginner, it's very hard to kind of know what should I be doing? How do I do this? So again, a report is created in the Power BI desktop, usually, doesn't have to be, but usually. And right now, the only place that you could create a data model is in the Power BI desktop. Now, if you have Visual Studio and some of those other tools that hardcore developers have, then yes, you could build a data model in Visual Studio. I have never done it, but most of us people, beginners, people who are not developers, we will do our data modeling in the Power BI desktop, at least initially. Every report has to have a data model that underpins it. You cannot have a report that does not have a data model. So once you've built your data model and you've built your report, then you're ready to share it with the world. Okay. Now, you first think, oh, I'm just going to email that to somebody. Well, you could. Okay. And the file type is called a PBIX, just like Excel is XLSX, and Word is DOCX. Okay. So when you create a file in the Power BI desktop, it's called a PBIX file. And yeah, you could email that to somebody. However, that is not a best practice, okay, because for several reasons. One, um, there are features, most notably like security, that do not get activated until you've actually published the report. Number two, it gives whoever receives that file complete control over the contents of that file. So that's not always something you want to do. And number three, those files can get huge. Okay, so while you could email a file to somebody, best practice is that you're going to publish that report into the Power BI service. Now, this is where a lot of people get confused. I train a lot of people, and I'll tell them, hey, you know what? We're going to open up the Power BI desktop, and inevitably someone will say, well, mine doesn't look like yours. And when I go look, they're looking at the service. They're not looking at the desktop. So the Power BI service is part of Office 365. I mean, it's not technically part of the Office 365 platform, but it has been embedded into the Office 365 service such that you can access it by going to Office 365. It has 3 major areas that you need to be aware of, at least out of the gate. The first one is called My Workspace. This is a personal area for experimentation, for sandboxing, for trying new things. Okay. It is not a place where you're going to publish a production report. Okay. And what I mean by a production report is a report that people are going to want to look at in order to run your business. Okay. Or whatever it is you're doing Power BI for. So my workspace exists. It is a sandbox. You certainly can use it for experimentation. However, when you get ready to share your report with the organization, even if it's just a small subset of the organization, then you're going to use what's called a workspace. Now, workspaces are very similar to teams conceptually, meaning um, they are membership based, so you have to be added to a workspace. And they are a place where the people who belong to the workspace can collaborate together on 5 different types of content. So the first type of content is, ooh, sorry, that was Zoom was pretty fast there, is your report, okay, that you published from the Power BI desktop and the data set that came along with it. Now, you may be saying to yourself, wait a minute, I didn't hear anything about a data set. And that's true. I only use the word data model. And data set is the combination of your model that you built and the data that is populating that model. Okay, so whenever you publish a report, a data set comes with it. Okay, so so those are the first column of icons. So it's the one that looks like the report and the one that looks like a little oil drum. That's your report and your data set. Then if you go over to the right-hand column, you'll see at the top something that looks like a chart, a column chart. That represents a dashboard. So dashboards and reports in Power BI are 2 different things. You will hear people talking about them interchangeably, but one of the first things you need to realize when you're working in Power BI is they're not the same thing, period. They're not the same thing. So a dashboard is a single virtual page. It can only be created in the service, and it is comprised of visuals from different reports that have been published into that workspace. So you could have, Darren and Carlos and Lou and Michelle and myself all publishing reports into a workspace, and then uh, Mary could come in and build a dashboard pulling from visuals that we put into our reports. Now, the thing about dashboards that can get, I think, a little confusing for people is they're not designed to be interactive. The way I like to think about dashboards is I told you I used to be a facilities manager. So after 9/11, we had to put in big screen TVs everywhere. So now, if you go into a workplace, most of the time you will see at least 2 or 3 or 4 big screen TVs. They may be running the local news, but they may also be, displaying, some information that management wants to share. Usually that's done through PowerPoint. Well, think about a dashboard as being something that you could use in that context. So it's just going to tell people, hey, this is where we are. It's a snapshot in time. So reports are interactive. They're designed to be, thoroughly explored. Dashboards are a snapshot in time. So that's kind of the big differences between reports and dashboards. Dashboards are also the only type of content that can have streaming of values. So if, for example, you were doing collecting Internet of Things data or stock market data, that kind of thing, you could only use or display that data in a dashboard, not in a report. The fourth type of content is represented by the little things with the little shapes and the arrows there, and that's called a data flow. So a data flow is where you capture the output after the green box on this screen. Okay, so a data flow is you've extracted your data, you've transformed it, but instead of loading it into the Power BI desktop, you capture it, and it is that all that work you did in the green box, if you will, gets saved, and then somebody else can come along and pick it up and use it in a Power BI desktop application. Guys, in a report. So a data flow is a way of performing all those transformations and saving them so that somebody else can pick it up and take it from there. And then the last icon there, the one with the grid, is an Excel spreadsheet, and that's the 5th type of content that you can have in a workspace. Now, you may notice I have the word app in front of that term workspace. That's because Microsoft used to call them app workspaces. They don't call them that anymore, okay? But I like to keep that word there just because I think it helps distinguish between my workspace and just plain old workspaces. And you might see that term if you're reading documentation. Okay, so again, I like people to just be aware of that. Then after you've got your reports and your dashboards built, you want to share those presumably with a broader audience in the organization. Okay, you don't, and what you are not ever going to do, okay, and this is a big thing that people run into trouble with, what you do not want to do is give people access to the workspace. That is a working area. Okay. So for example, I used to work for Unilever, and we had a lot of factories. And whenever you went into a factory, you had very specific things you could and could not do, places you could go, places you could not go, all that kind of stuff. Well, workspace is really the same thing. It's a factory for data. And so you're going to keep that space limited to the people who really need to work on this content together. Once it's ready for production, once it's ready to be shared, what you're going to do is you're going to include it in the app that is associated with the workspace. So that's why they used to be called app workspaces, is because they have a workspace can have an app associated with it. Now, don't think of a mobile app in this scenario. There is a mobile app for Power BI. This is not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is a way of packaging and delivering content to a wider audience. I like to think of it as a magazine or a newspaper. So you pick and choose which stories, which reports, which dashboards you want to share with a broader audience. You put those into the app, and then you define who can see what content. So it's possible to have different content included in the app and have that aligned to different audiences. So you could have, an audience for senior leadership, defined as senior leadership, and they only get to see, they see certain things. Then you could have one defined for, let's say, finance, and they get to see certain things. And there could be overlap between those two audiences, or they can be completely separate. But the important thing is to realize is that the app is your distribution vehicle with Power BI. You don't email files to people, and you don't give them access to your workspaces. Now, final thing to talk about here is that when you start by pulling data, it could take you, so from the start to the end of this process, it could take you a month to develop a report. Okay, it could take you 2 months. It's not an overnight thing, especially if you're starting from scratch. So let's just say that this entire work stream took 2 months before you had a working report that you were ready to publish. Well, fair enough. But once you publish it, you need to make sure that people are looking at the latest data, because it took you 2 months and you are still working with, the data that was 2 months old. And that is normally perfectly fine for when you're developing a report. Okay. But once you publish it, you want to make sure that that data stays up to date. And the way you do that is that you set up a scheduled refresh of the data. So once you've published the report into a workspace, again, not my workspace. My workspaces cannot do this, okay, but into a regular workspace, then depending on the type of license that you have, you can set up a refresh of the data, and Power BI will take care of, the service will take care of going to the sources and pulling out, on a schedule, pulling out the latest data that, and rehydrating, if you will, the report. If the report or the dashboards are included in an app, then that data will also get it will appear, with the latest data in the app as well. So that's kind of an overview of the life cycle. So let me stop there and just see if there's any questions or comments or thoughts.
Yeah, this is great. By the way, let me see if I can pull up. Yeah,
We
so we have
got
a few
Nicole.
comments, just mostly just saying hello, but
I
this is
know,
great
right?
stuff.
And Nicole, Carlos, Lou, Michelle, feel free to jump in. I really don't mind being interrupted. It doesn't bother me in the least. And if I know that I'm going to kind of demonstrate that, I'll let you know. But again, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to say something. And there's Kurt. Do you have any questions, Kurt, so far? You good? You're on mute, but I'm assuming you're saying you're good.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, very well presented so far.
Okay, good. All right. And
There's a lot of stuff to this.
Oh, yes. And this is actually a fairly streamlined view of this. There are other tools that people use. I usually, when I'm teaching beginners, I do not get into all of those because it can be very, very confusing. So I just focus on making sure people understand how all the fundamental tools work together. So.
Yeah, I think this was the biggest hurdle for me when I was looking at Power BI content is like there's so many things that like I know I can embed an import and it asks for a workspace and all these
Yep.
different things. I love how you've laid out all these different layers and give us a good perspective from the get-go before we just start going in writing reports and stuff because you really need to understand all this, right?
Oh, yes, you do. And Paul, everybody give it up for Paul. He's got the first question.
Yeah.
How long would you say it takes to master the art of data modeling? Oh, that's such a good question. um, sorry, that was my sinister, evil laugh. Um, hmm. Well, like everything, it depends on where you're starting from. But let's just take it that you are, and I don't know if you are or you're not, obviously. But let's just assume you're a flatlander like I was. Okay, so I call anybody, including myself, who's come into this from Excel. I call us flatlanders because we're used to working in Excel where everything has got to be in one worksheet. Okay, if you want to do a pivot table, everything has to be in that worksheet. So first you've got to make that jump from, you're not going to keep everything in a single worksheet into the concept of what a data model is overall. And then you've got to work on understanding sort of what a star schema is, which is what we call the ideal model shape. Okay. And I'm going to cover, as I said, we're going to fly through a demo, but I'll try to cover those points. So Paul, I would say if you were doing it nonstop, dedicated, maybe 6 months to really read a bunch of books and, get ready for that. The bigger hurdle is learning the language called DAX, data analysis expressions, because that's necessary when you want to add calculations to your model. So if you want to learn DAX, that's a journey. I will say I've been I've been working on learning DAX for 3 years now. I've taken classes, I've gotten books, and so on. Oh, look at he says he's on his way. Yay, you, Paul. Love it.
Now,
Um,
is DAX like SQL, the structured query language?
Not well, first of all, let me just say I'm not a great person to ask that because I don't speak SQL. I don't know how to write SQL. It's more like Excel functional language, and I'll show you a couple examples. But it's not so much the syntax because the syntax is very similar to Excel. So if you've written Excel formulas, you're going to understand the syntax. The issue is not that. The issue is understanding, quote unquote, how it thinks. And learning how DAX thinks is the big hurdle. Okay, so Okay, hold on, Lou. So our corporate is doing this with data of all franchisees in the system. I would like to know more to do more reports that cater to our personal requirements. That's an interesting question. Well, let me jump into the demo. Because I'm going to I've streamlined it and I've made it very simple because again, we don't have that much time together. But let me try to start doing that, Lou, so at least you can kind of get a feeling of, okay, what's this workflow look like? Okay. Now, before I do that, I have found that using the analogy of a kitchen is really helpful. Okay. For me, I don't know about you guys, but in 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 the way I'm presenting Power BI to you today, it's basically like you're opening your own restaurant and you're going to do it all. Okay. You are going to be the person who preps the food, shops for the food, preps the food, designs the menus, cooks the food, serves the food, prices the food. Everything to do with running that restaurant is all on your shoulders. Okay. So that's kind of the, oh, there we go. Paul says he cooks. Okay. Perfect. So, what I'm going to show you today is a workflow that assumes that you're going to touch each and every part of this. But let me just tell you that there are other work possibilities. And one of those is that you get people who are really good at Power Query Editor, and maybe they develop the data in a data flow, and then they're done with their piece. And then someone else picks that data up and puts it into the desktop, and they develop the model and they develop the calculations that go in the model. And so that's a separate set of expertise. And then finally, someone else can pick up that model and work on the report itself, which is a third level of expertise. So you will be kind of seeing kind of you'll in under the parameters that I'm presenting today, you kind of have to know a little bit about all of it, same way you would if you were running a restaurant by yourself. If you're running a restaurant where you have a chef and you have people who prep and people who wash the dishes, then you can kind of pick and choose what your subject matter expertise is going to be. Okay. All right. So let me kill this and let me get, hold on. Let me get, I've never used this platform that you're using, Darren. So it's kind of fun to learn something new.
Yeah.
Kind of fun to learn something new. All right. Hold on, there we go. Let me get this shared. Okay, let me just check in, make sure. Okay, now I've lost my Darren window. Sorry, guys.
No, that's all good.
Sometimes we just have to find our windows, and that's the biggest battle of the day, is finding the darn windows. Okay, this is done. All right, hold on.
While she's
All right.
finding that, guys, I know, Jessica, you have got a book out there published on Amazon. So I included the link there at the very top.
Oh, you're
Um,
so nice. Yes. I was asked last year to, there you are, I found you, to write something about getting certified.
mhm.
So I wrote it under very tight parameters because I was asked to really stick to the list of competencies for the exam. So I did that, but I also really tried to include information that would help you just be be able to tackle Power BI in your job. Okay, so again, it is for certification, but I tried to write it so that if you have zero interest in being certified and you just want to, kind of get your feet wet with Power BI, that it would do that as well. So, all right. So I am now. Let me check. You don't see my screen yet. Hold on. Nope. Let me get my screen back up here. Hold on. And we will transition. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk you through a workflow, sample workflow with kind of every stage that's happening. Again, just be aware I've kept this super basic just in the interest of time. And all right, hold on. Come on, window. Let's go. It says I'm sharing.
Very good. Yeah, it seems to be loading there.
It's loading. All right. So while we're waiting for it to load, first of all, let me just say, while we're waiting for it to load, one thing to be aware of is that Power BI, and if you work with Teams as well, you have the Teams client and you have the Power BI desktop application,
Yeah.
you are headed for a world of hurt, people, because Power BI is a hog and so is Teams. So
Oh,
just so you know,
maybe install some
just
memory, more memory.
oh, yes, I would never tell anybody, do not go into this with less than 16 megabytes of RAM. Not I would go 32 or 64. And
Okay.
I have, I think, 64 on my machine, and it still gets hung up.
Oh,
And hold on, we're waiting. So hold on. Yes, Mary was saying in the private chat, she says, "Is that the book I helped you edit a part of a section?" Yes, Mary, yes. Of course I asked Mary because Mary is so. All right, hold on, guys. You're not seeing it yet, right, guys?
Um, it looks a little pixelated. I know at the very beginning it was like that, but after a moment it all cleared up.
Oh, let's keep our fingers crossed then, people, that's what's going to happen because I don't know what's going on. Okay, it stopped trying. Um, let's see. Hold on. I'm just going to try it again, guys.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have it, it's going to be, oh, hang on. Hello.
Here we go.
All right, so while we're waiting for this, because I don't want to lose any time.
Mhm.
What I'm going to do, this is going to be a lot like a kitchen show, guys. I don't
Mhm.
watch any kitchen cooking shows. I mean, I watch a few, but you know how they show when, they're mixing everything together and then they throw it in the oven and then they immediately pull out a cooked thing. So this is going to be a little bit like that. So
Cool.
let me just tell you what I'm doing while we're waiting here. So what I'm going to get ready to do here is I've got my Power BI desktop up, okay, and ready to go if this will ever display it. And I am going to go out and I'm going to get some data. Okay, it's just going to be an Excel spreadsheet, and I will demonstrate. That will open up the Power Query editor. So I will demonstrate a sample or two of, the types of transformations that you're going to need to make. Once we do that, I'm going to go into cooking show mode and I'm going to open up a different version where I've already got some visuals in here and, kind of give you a walk around that and create a visual or two. And then I am going to publish it up into the service. So again, I'm just hoping that we can get anything. What is happening here?
I just saw it
Mm,
started to slowly. So if you guys in the chat, do you guys see her screen okay? For me it's
'cause
just a little blurry. But if it looks great, yeah, so I think Mary
oh,
said.
that looks something is happening. Wait, something is happening. Come on. Oy vey. Okay, hold on. Let's try it again. All right. I love technology, you guys. I do. I
Yeah.
love technology. Okay, let me try just doing an entire screen. Let's see if that works. Okay, it says it's blurred. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to narrate what I'm doing. And you know what? I'll zoom up so that it just might look a little, well, and of course, it won't show on the zoom here. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of just walk you through what I'm doing. So once you are getting ready to start a project, okay, you are going to start in the Power BI desktop. And the first thing you've got to do is you've got to go get your data. Now, again, I mentioned that it connects to over 200 sources. I am, only going to use Excel here in the interest of time and simplicity, but you can connect to SQL databases and all kinds of things. Okay. You can get data from the internet. Pretty much the sky is the limit. But and I know you probably can't see this, but I just clicked on a tile that says get data, and I'm just going to pick Excel workbook. Okay, so that's all. And so again, if you can't read it, that's what it says. Okay, and now takes me out to my um, desktop or my machine, and I'm going to go look for where I have this particular data that I want to use. Okay, so again, I happen to have it stored here, but that doesn't mean, you could go to SharePoint, you could go, anywhere that you can go normally, you can go get your data. So I'm going to open up something. And all I'm doing, if you can't see it, all I'm doing is navigating. Oh,
There we
there
go.
we go.
Fantastic.
Finally. Goodness, that took a minute and a half. Okay. So all I'm doing is, and again, the importance of the file itself doesn't really matter too much. I'm just picking an Excel file, okay, and I just clicked open. And now what's going to happen is it's going to open up the Power Query editor. So remember that green box. That's where we're going now. And let me zoom. Now I am noticing that when I zoom, you guys, it doesn't seem to reflect in your window. Ooh, that was too much zooming. Oh, that's good. Okay, it is. Yay. All right, so here you can see that I have multiple things in this Excel worksheet, workbook, excuse me. Okay, and one of the things you'll notice is that I have an item called product table. Now, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're working with Power Apps, it requires that your data be in a table format.
That's right.
Is that okay? It's not the case here in Power BI. Power BI does not have that kind of requirement. However, if you do have your data in a table in an Excel worksheet, it's going to show up as a separate object. Okay. But I just keep that there so that I can demonstrate that. Okay. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick 3 different worksheets out of this workbook just by clicking on the green dots here. And again, doesn't really matter, or green boxes, doesn't really matter what they are right now. I didn't, well, it kind of matters because I didn't want pivoted zips. So let me get rid of that. Get product. And you don't have to take everything that's in a workbook. Okay. So again, you can pick and choose what you want. And over here on the right-hand side, you're going to see preview of the data. You're not going to do anything with this data at this point in time. You're just able to see it to make sure that it looks the way it should look, that you connected to the right data. And then we're going to come down to this button down here, and it's going to say load and transform data. And what we're going to do is we're going to choose transform data. And whenever you see the word transform in Power BI, it's going to refer to the Power Query editor. So when I click on transform data, that means it's going to take it into the Power Query editor. And I will tell you that most of the time, you are going to need to take your data into the Power Query editor. In fact, the rule of thumb is it's 80% of your time will be spent performing transformations and preparing the data models. So only the last 20% of any project is really building the report itself, because it's all the work is in getting it prepared. So I'm just going to demonstrate a few transformations here so you get the idea of what's going on. Okay, so Power Query Editor looks a lot like Excel, but it isn't Excel. And one of the first transitions you need to make, going back to Paul's question about, how hard is this to learn? One of the first shifts you need to make mentally is that you're dealing now with columns. You deal a little bit with rows, but you deal primarily in columns once you are in the Power BI world. And the reason that you need to make that transition is because that's how the data is stored. Okay, the engine underneath the Power BI technology is called a Vertipack engine, and it's a columnar store engine. And everything that you need to be thinking about, especially when we get to DAX, you need to think about in terms of columns. You do not work with cells, and you only work a little bit with rows. Okay, so the first thing I can see here is that my titles for my columns are in the first row. So I need to quickly kind of get those up. So I'm going to come up to the ribbon, and I'm just going to choose use first row as headers. Okay, and that's going to automatically promote that first row to be headers. Then I notice over here that I have a bunch of nulls. Now, it so happens that in this scenario, I know that what's happened with this data is that it has been formatted for humanize. So what that means is, as humans, we come in here and we know, okay, just sort of by understanding the data, we know that mix should go all the way down until it finds the next entry. Okay, so I just said you can't work with cells. So that means you can't sort of drag and drop the contents of a cell down. So instead, what we have to do is we're going to use a feature called fill. So I'm going to just right click on this category header up here at the top. And unfortunately, I apologize, I cannot zoom in once I've got a right click menu here. So just, I know you can't read it, but I'll tell you what it says. I'm going about 50% of the way, no, about 60% of the way down. And I'm choosing something that says fill down. Okay, so that what that's going to do is that will fill mix all the way down until it finds the next value, and then it will fill with that value and so on. Okay, so here you see what it did. It filled, it got rid of all the nulls there. Okay, so I no longer have any nulls in my data, which is a good thing. All right, now, next thing that you're going to want to see is over here on the right-hand side, I have a price column. Okay, now the problem with the price column is I have this USD value in here. So what that does is it automatically causes the column to be text, which is not good. I can't add up text, I can't average text, I can't multi text. So I need to get rid of that USD. Now it's Power Query Editor is an incredibly flexible tool. It is absolutely so forgiving. Okay, so one of the things that I want to encourage all of you to do is to feel free to experiment. And I'll show you in a minute how you correct your mistakes, but it is an extremely forgiving tool. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this. Now, I could be using the ribbon. I'm just choosing not to use the ribbon because I know a lot of people like to do right clicking. But again, everything that's in the right click is also in the ribbon. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down about 50% of the way down. Again, I apologize, I can't zoom up on that. And I'm going to choose replace values. And this is something you should be familiar with from Excel. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to enter. Okay, I'm just going to enter USD space in here, and I'm going to replace it with nothing. Okay, so again, and I do have to make sure that I have put in capitals. Okay, when we're in the Power Query Editor, we are working in a tool whose native language is M, as in mashup. M, without you knowing how to code an M, M is case sensitive. So if I were to type in lowercase u, lowercase s, lowercase d, I'd be in a world of hurt because it wouldn't find it. So again, one of the things to know about the Power Query Editor is its native language is M, and it is also a it's also case sensitive. Those are just a couple of the little things. And oh, I see the question there. Darren's got a good question. So hang on, everybody. Let me finish this replacement. Okay. So now you can see when I zoom in, the USD value is gone, but you can still see that it treats it as text. How do I know that? Because they're left aligned. And so I still have an issue, which I will address in 1 minute. But before I do that, let me actually get to Darren's question because it's a good one. He said, I think that was Darren's question. At some point, could you address
Yeah,
why nulls? Go ahead. Sorry, Darren.
yeah, it was Mary. She shared it in the private chat, and then I just
Oh,
pasted it over. So yeah.
of course it had to be Mary. So Why are nulls problematic? So the thing about a null, if you think about it, when you have a null in a column, it's almost always going to stand in for something else, meaning it's going to be, it can mean one of multiple things. It could mean I left it blank because I didn't know what it was. It could mean that it should be 0. It can mean NA, so not applicable. So the problem with nulls is that they are very ambiguous. So just generally in data modeling, you don't want nulls, okay? You do not want nulls. You want to be very explicit about what value, if you don't have a value in there, put something in there that indicates that, because a null can be read in multiple different ways. Did that address your question, Mary? Let me know. All right, so now I got to do something else in here. Okay, now I see that in my product column, I have multiple values all jumped up here together. Okay, so I've got a value for the manufacturer, I have a value for the product table, and then I have a value for the subcategory. And this is, again, something you do not want to do in a tabular model. In a tabular model, every column should represent a single type of value. You don't want to do this sort of mix and match here, because if you think about it, if you want to do a chart that shows, by manufacturer the sales, you don't really have a way to do that at this moment in time. So we need to split this column. So I'm going to split it 3 times. Okay, so I'm just right clicking. And again, I apologize that you can't see it, but it's down about 60% of the way down the menu. I'm going to do split column by delimiter. And by the way, if you've ever done text to columns in Excel, this will sound familiar to you. Okay, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it that I want it to split where the pipe is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pipe in here, and I'll blow that up so you can just see it real quick. Okay, hang on, there we go. So I put a pipe in. That's not a capital I, that's a pipe. And then I have these options over here: split at the left, split at the right, or each occurrence. In this case, it doesn't matter because there's only one occurrence, so I can go ahead and hit OK. And immediately, I now have a second column that just isolates what was after the pipe. Okay, so again, I have a second column that represents subcategory values now. And I recognize that it's not called that yet, so we'll get there. And then I'm going to split the column again. So again, about 50% of the way down by delimiter. And this time I'm just going to split it by the space. And once again, it does not matter whether it's left or it's right. There is only one space in this scenario at this point. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I have taken what was 3 columns with a bunch of data mashed up, and I have isolated each column to be one value, represent one value. Now, obviously not literally one value, but one type of value. So in a tabular model, your goal is every column should represent one type of value. Now, I'm going to quickly come through and rename these, because if you look, after I split them, those names aren't very helpful. So I'm going to just very quickly come through and right click on this, and I'm going to call this manufacturer. Okay, then I'm going to call the second one product. And again, I know it's not easy to see, but I'm just double clicking just like I would in Excel. Okay, and just renaming it so it's got one single name up here at the top. Subcategory. Category. Oh, can't see myself. Category. Let's see. I think I misspelled that, but whatever. We'll work with it. Now, in addition to getting your data prepped, like we just did, we just saw some examples. In addition to that, one of the most important things you can do in the Power Query Editor, and this is true, by the way, if you're using Power Query Editor in Excel, let's say, is setting the correct data type. Okay, so the correct data type determines how the data is going to be stored. Okay, and in the engine. And the example that I've started to use is I don't know, for the some of you probably won't even have any idea what I'm talking about, but I have friends, and I'm not too far off from this, who are like container store junkies. Okay, like everything's got to be in a little box, and everything's nested, and then I've got my alpha drawers and whatever. And I have to say, it does look nice when everything is organized. And so think of your data types as being the little alpha storage containers that are going to contain your data. And you want to pick the optimal data storage type for each column. And so if I start from the left over here, okay, you will see there's a little box that has the number 123 here, which means that product ID is going to be stored as a whole number. And that's fine. Even though I'm never going to add up product ID, I'm never going to average it. It's still the holy grail for the data types is to try to get something stored as a whole number. Okay. If you cannot store it as a whole number, if you, let me back up and say that again. Even though I'm never going to average or sum up or do anything mathematical with these product IDs, therefore I could store them as text. If you have the option to store a data as a whole number, do it, because without any, if it's not going to compromise anything in your data, because whole numbers they compress the most effectively. And one of the things about Power BI is it runs with, you can be working with 20, 30, 40 million rows. Compression is very important. Okay. Now, manufacturer is just text. Anytime you have words, letters, yeah, there you go. If you can store values as a whole numbers, do it. Exactly. Anything that's got letters in it is going to be stored as a whole number. And then manufacturer ID is the same as product ID. Even though I'm never going to add them up, I still am going to try to store those as a whole number because they get compressed much more effectively. The only exception to this is don't do that with zip codes. Zip codes have to be stored as text, or what you're going to do is strip out the leading zero, and then you're going to have a problem. So the last one I want to talk about here is price. Now, I mentioned that we know that it is still set as a text data type because it says ABC here. So what we need to do is change this. So when you are storing your data that is related to currency, always, 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 and I apologize, I don't think you can, I can never zoom up on these little menus. So I apologize that you can't see it. So I'm clicking on the little icon there, and I'm getting a list of different data types. The data type that I want to use for currency, no exceptions, always, is fixed decimal number. And I apologize, you can't read it, but it's at the top of the list up there, right underneath decimal number. The reason you choose fixed decimal number for currency is because it's going to preserve 4 digits of accuracy after the decimal. So if you have, if you need to, or if you're concerned about rounding accuracy, you're going to lose it maybe if you choose just plain old decimal numbers. So again, rules, hard and fast rule, currency is always fixed decimal. So I'm going to change that to fixed decimal. And there are lots of other data types there. I'm just skimming over them, but again, there are a lot of different data types, but those are some of the big ones. Now, I want to come over here and I want to show you what makes Power Query Editor so powerful and so fun and forgiving. Is that what you're doing here in the Power Query Editor is you're writing a script. You're actually not doing anything to the data. Okay, you've not pulled any data yet. Okay, all you've done is gone out and gotten a snapshot, a preview of the data. and you've written a script. And every time you performed a change using the ribbon or the right-click menu, a step was written down. Now, if you've done macros, which I suspect several of you have done in Excel, um, macros, the process of writing a macro, recording a macro is very similar to this. Okay, so what you're doing is you are recording steps, and what will happen is when you say apply, which we'll do in a minute here, when you do that, these steps are then compiled into a script in M. Remember, this is M language. And depending on the source, okay, and I'm not going to get too deep into that because we're already at 102, but depending on the source type, the script will get translated back to the native language of the source. So if you were connecting to a SQL server, that this whole script will get translated back to SQL, and all of these changes will be performed on the data as it is being extracted. Okay, so again, up until this point, you have done nothing. You've done nothing to the data. You never have to worry about changing the data at the source. What you are doing is writing a script that when you tell it that you're ready, then it will go out and it will perform these steps. Now, if you go into the Power Query editor and you look for an undo button, you won't find one. And the reason is because what you have to do is you have to work with the steps. So if you wanted to delete a step, every step has a little X next to it. So again, you can delete steps, you can rearrange steps, you can change a step, you can insert a step. So again, very, very flexible. So again, I love the Power Query Editor. I think that was Mary that said earlier she loves the Power Query Editor. Me too. Best tool they ever invented, and it is it's a result of a failed project. Interestingly enough, this is what was left over out of a failed project, and to me, this is one of the best products they've ever done. But anyway, all right, so let's pretend that we're done. Of course, in real life, you'd be doing a lot more work here. Okay, but let's pretend that we're done. We can come up and hit close and apply. As soon as we do that, that script that we've written, and actually it's a script for each query, is going to go out to the source and apply those changes and then pull the changed data into the Power BI desktop. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, again, remember kitchen show time here, guys. So I am going to now go into a file that I already prepared. So hang on. There we go. Let me get it over on the screen. Oh, I hope we don't have problems. Oh, no, good. It worked. Phew, because I was a little worried there we were going to end up with a little bit of delay. Now, so now I'm back into the Power BI desktop. So if we're thinking about boxes on that PowerPoint, we're in the yellow box now. Now I've taken the liberty of just putting a few very, very basic visuals up here. I will delete one of them and recreate it just so you have an idea of, pretty much how easy it is. The work is in the data transformations and the data model. That's where the work is. Okay, so not really in the visuals. So when you're in the desktop, yes, so I think Mary is saying in a chat, there's a pivot option where you can rearrange the data into columns. Yep, absolutely. Power Query Editor is your friend, man. I don't care what you're doing, it's your friend. Once you're in the Power BI desktop, you have 3 modes that you can look at. So the first mode is the report view, and that's what we're in right now. Okay. Then you have the data view. Okay. Now I'm just going to zoom in so you can see. This is all the data that we have brought over. Okay. And we did a lot of transformations that, again, in the interest of time, I just did behind the scenes. So you don't have to watch me go through them. And why isn't my Zoom working? Hold on. Yes, Kurt is asking a really good question. So Let me stop here just quickly. So Kurt's question was, we are taking data and bringing it into Power BI, but is there ever a scenario where we may be working with live data? If you connected to a SQL server, okay, of some type, whether it's Oracle or Microsoft or whatever, there is an option called direct query. Now, direct query will, what you are doing when you do a direct query is you are connecting to that source live. You are not, so here are some of the downfalls, okay? Because it sounds really great, okay? And every time I train, people are like, but direct query, direct query, direct query. And I'm like, no. And here's why. Number one, Power BI is a very chatty application client. I don't even know what you call it. Okay, it's very chatty. So what you're doing when you do direct query is you're opening up like a pipeline, okay, a communication link between Power BI and that server. Okay. And you're working with the data that's on that server in that SQL database. You can't change the data, you can't model the data. All you can do is work with it as it is in the SQL server. Now, the advantage to that is you're working with up to the minute data. Okay, so that data changes every minute, then you're going to see those changes every minute. However, there's a lot of downsides to that. One is you could cripple the server that SQL database is loaded onto. Why? Because Power BI, every time someone interacts with your report, that's a query that goes back to that server. And if your database, if the server was not configured for that kind of traffic, you can bring down a server with what Power BI likes to do. So yes, you can use direct query, but the question really needs to be, how often do you make changes to your business based on the data? Okay, so I really like to use the example, and it's extreme, of like air traffic controllers. Okay, obviously they would not be using Power BI report. Okay, but just work with me. In the case of an air traffic controller, he or she or they need to be able to make decisions, every 10 seconds, 5 seconds. I don't even know how often. Okay, so again, in that extreme, you would have to have the latest data all the time because you're taking decisions on the latest data. But let's say you're looking at sales data and you're taking decisions once a week, once a quarter, once a month, whatever it is. You do not need to be working with the direct data because you're going to be able to refresh the data. So you can, with a regular old Power BI Pro license, you can refresh the data up to 8 times a day. And for most people, that is going to be sufficient. If you have a higher need than that, there is another level of licensing where you can refresh the data up to 48 times a day. So again, yes, there are some use cases for direct query, but I always tell people, don't just opt for that because it sounds good. You're going to pay a very heavy price but for using direct query, and it has to be worth it. And then the second part of that question was, can you apply these changes to the live data? Do you mean, so let me just answer this in a pretty basic way. Nothing you do in Power BI is going to write back to anything. Okay, so you are never going to be applying changes to live data. Could, under direct query, you can receive live data, but you can never write back. There are tools, third-party tools that you can buy, but Power BI in and of itself has no write back at all. So Kurt, did that answer your question? I think that was Kurt.
Yeah, that was me. I was more concerned about the Power Query editor. Can that write to the query direct to the live data?
Nope. Nope.
Okay, there
Nope.
you go. There you go.
You're only writing a script. So,
Very good.
and if
That's
you were doing
unfortunate.
if you were doing direct query, You're not even going through Power Query Editor at all, because you can't, all you're doing is you're creating a pipeline into that data source, and you're pulling the data as it is. You're not going to be able to change it. You're not going to be able to modify it. You're
I
just
see.
pulling it in as it is.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of scrubbing data. If you go onto a site where you just started the site and the data is terrible, you go in there and scrub it and make changes. This was an awesome, fast way of scrubbing data. It seemed like that.
Oh, it is. And you
Yeah.
can do it in, let's say, the service and use a data flow and then save that work.
Okay.
So you could actually do it that way, but you're still not writing back and you are not doing a direct connection.
Very good.
All
Thank you.
right, good questions. Let's see. Can you set up a flow to refresh on a schedule? You don't. The great question, Lou. You don't need to do that because that's built into the Power BI service. So you don't need to have Automate to do that. I know people have used Power Automate for other applications within Power BI, but you don't need it for refreshing. That's already a capability that's built into the capabilities of Power BI. Okay, so this is the data view right here. Once the data is in, there's very little you can really do with the data here. You can look at it, you can format it. If you have to, you can change the data type, but your thought process should be that once the data gets into the Power BI desktop, it should be pretty good to go. Okay, this is not where you do your transformations. Okay, but it's very helpful to see your data just so you can do a sanity check. Now, the third view is the model. Okay, and of everything we're going to talk about, probably the model is the most important, because without a good model, your reports, if they work at all, will be very slow and they may not generate the proper information. So I mentioned earlier, and let me zoom up on this just so you can kind of see it a little bit. You should be seeing 4 boxes. Each box represents one of the tables that we brought in. Okay. When I was doing the little demo over there, you only saw me working with one query, which then turns into a table. But in this, it's a kitchen show. So I've already prepared all of these behind the scenes. So each one of these represents a table that I brought in from the Power Query Editor. And the thing about Power BI is you don't want your data denormalized to the point where you have to hop from, you have to do a hop that goes from one box to another box to another box. Okay. So in Power BI, your goal is that you're going to have what we call a single fact table. Okay, so let me see if I can write that here. Fact. Okay. And in this example, that's this all sales table. And the all sales table lists all the transactions. So your fact table is going to list the transactions that you want to be able to put into a chart, put into a graph, whatever. Those are the things, those are the reasons that you're getting into Power BIs, because you want to be able to display metrics about these facts. Okay, so your fact table is usually going to be your longest. It's going to have the most number of rows. It's going to have the least number of columns. Only the columns that are necessary to describe that fact, whether it's an appointment or a transaction or something else. Then you're going to have what we call dim tables, and that is short for dimension. Okay, so all 3 of these here are dimension tables. One is for product, one is for geography, and one is for manufacturer. Dimension tables are where you put the fields that describe in further detail your transactions. So for example, if you had a sales transaction, you would not have the customer name, address, phone number, contact, and so on in your fact table. The only thing that would show up in your fact table is your customer, the unique customer ID. Then you would have a customer table that has all of that information about the customer. And it also has that customer ID associated with it. And then what you do is you create these relationships. So these lines all represent a relationship going from one of the tables to another table. And this is where the data modeling gets, you have to start to understand the different types of relationships that are possible, which ones are ideal, which ones are less than ideal, and how you can work around those. But the one thing you need to know is that if you don't have relationships between tables, you are not going to get a meaningful visual between, by using a particular field from your dimension table and another corresponding field from your fact table. Okay, because if you don't have that relationship, then Power BI does not know how to connect those two facts together. Doesn't. So going back to my customer ID, let's say I wanted a visual that showed me by customer who bought what. If I don't have a relationship between my customer table and my fact table, I'm only going to get a long list of customers, and I'm only going to get all, just the total sales that were made, period, because it doesn't know how to connect those things. So part of that data modeling journey is just making sure that all the relationships are in place and that they are the right type of relationship. So that's the model. And now this is a very simple model. Okay, but let's see. So Kurt says, if I understand you right, I'm not going to have much success with two-level deep relationships. So like what we have here, Kurt, is what you're referring to?
This looks like a regular single level, but if I was doing a lookup into a lookup,
Yeah, so you do not want to go, if you can avoid that, you want to. So that's a little bit of what I have here, okay, because I've got manufacturer, which is a dimension table going into product, and it's connected. Let me zoom up so you can see. It's connected on manufacturer ID, okay? So both of these tables have manufacturer ID, so a relationship has been built on the fact that they both have manufacturer ID. So yes, this is kind of a lookup situation.
Mhm.
Um, Technically, this is called a snowflake. Okay, so the perfect table, the perfect data model, okay, is going to have your fact table at the center, and then radiating out, obviously in a virtual fashion, are all your dim tables. Okay, and you can have a lot of different dim tables, and this is called a star schema. And star, because again, the way you draw it, this perfect scenario is, been typically drawn as a star. And ideally, you have one hop from one dimension table to the fact table. Just it only has to traverse one relationship. Now, can it work if you have another dim table connected to this one?
Right.
Sure, it will work. Okay.
Okay.
It's not ideal. The problem becomes when you start stringing tables off of tables off of tables,
Mhm.
then you start to see a performance hit if you have a lot of data, if there's a lot of factors that go into it. So what I tell people is strive for the star schema, but if you get a couple of them that kind of look like this, it's not the end of the world. Okay, this is a snowflake. It's starting to be a snowflake. It's not going to make a big difference, but each report's going to be slightly different. And you're always striving for that ideal of a star schema. Okay, so to answer your question, Kurt, um,
Yeah, but no.
you can do it. Okay, you can do it, but it's better to learn to model your way through as close as you can get to the star schema.
Very good.
Okay, so
Very good.
all
Thank
right, now so the model is here. Okay, now again, I'm skipping over a whole bunch of stuff here. Let me go back to the report. Okay, and let me just come in here and show you what these elements are. So at the top here, I have a slicer. A slicer is just a filter. And so if I pick a company, and now all this is fake data here. If I pick a company, then that is going, let me unselect all first, okay, and then hit a company. Then all of these guys should change. Did they change? Hold on, let me see, because if they changed, I missed it. Why are these not showing up as changed? There we go, something's working there, finally. Okay, I think it was just being slow. If I had to summarize Power BI in one word, it's about filters. Okay, regardless, it's about filters. And a slicer is a visual filter that allows you to slice based on whatever you've put into the slicer. And you also have what's called a filter panel over here that gives you a lot more capabilities. So for example, if I wanted to see what the total sales by category and total sales by subcategory are for Canada, okay, I can select on Canada over here. Okay, wait a minute, it's being very slow. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so all I did was choose Canada, and that will give me the information on the page, but just for Canada. So slicers and the filter panel are what will allow you to slice and dice the data. Okay, I'm going to quickly recreate this little guy here. I'm going to take him out, delete him so you can see one being built here. So I'm just going to delete that guy. The process of creating a visual is pretty easy once you get the hang of it. So the first thing you do is you come over to the right-hand side and you select the type of visual you want, okay? Yes, so there's a little trick with that slicer visual there, Kurt, that I'd have to explain to you, but yeah, it's a cool thing. But I'm gonna pick a clustered column, okay? And all I'm doing when I pick it, when I say I'm picking it, I just click on the image once. And you're not seeing it really, but if I hover over each of these little icons, come on, zoom up for me, you would see that it gives you the name of each chart, okay? But now I have a little placeholder, and now I'm just gonna come over here to the right-hand side. Hello, there we go, the right-hand side, and I'm just gonna take subcategory and put it up here into the x-axis. And if you've ever done this in a pivot table, this is gonna look very familiar to you, okay? And then I am going to put under subcategory, I want to come in and I want to put in total sales. So let me zoom up so you can see that. Come on, there we go. Total sales. Okay, sorry about all that zooming. Okay, so there's total sales. So I'm going to drag that into the values, to the y-axis. Okay, so what I have is I have a chart that shows me sales by for each subcategory. Now, it turns out that this total sales that I used is called a measure. And I know that Mary asked that I just mention measures and DAX a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to display this up in the formula bar. Okay, so DAX is the language that you use in Power BI. Okay, it is different from M. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this to zoom for us so you can just see an example. Okay, hold on. Is that getting any bigger? It's getting a little bigger so you can start to see it. So
yeah.
you can notice that it's written with a very similar syntax to Excel. As I mentioned, it's a functional, I don't know if I mentioned this, but it is a functional language. Okay. And then you tell every function has a required set of arguments. In this case, the sum function just needs a column name. In this case, the column name was total sale and its table name was all sales. So DAX, the thing about DAX that makes it very, very complicated is that, well, it makes it hard to get really good at it, is it uses columns. Okay, by default, DAX uses columns. And if you're coming from Excel, you're not used to thinking of things in columns. So Kurt's comment there is interesting about single dimension array. Kurt, is that a Power Apps thing, or are you talking about Excel there?
I'm just talking about programming in its general. Okay, so like I'm thinking a column is a single dimensional array. Measure, you just explained, I think is a variable, right? If you were looking at programming languages, it's going to store that information in that measure that you created, right?
Yes, but there
yeah.
is also such a thing as a variable, and they are used. The only thing that DAX doesn't have that a lot of programming languages has is it doesn't have this concept of a local and a universal variable. A variable is there's only one kind, and there's only ever going to be one value stored in it.
Okay.
So it does have its own it does use variables.
But now
But
in your case, total sales right there will just store one value, right?
just, yeah, whatever the value is of total sales. And again, it's adding up the entire column.
Yeah.
So again, we got to get away. If we're coming from Excel, we have to get away from rows, thinking about rows. We got to get away from thinking about cells. Okay, DAX thinks in columns. It can work with rows. It can. But in general, and in fact, I think I'm posting on my blog, I'm a little behind. I'm going to post a little example of doing the same calculation 3 different ways so you can kind of see it. But DAX, if you're going to be a data modeler, you're going to have to learn DAX. You're not going to have a choice. In the Power Query editor, you don't have to learn M, but if you're going to data model, you have to learn DAX. Now, I'm watching the clock and I'm realizing we're running out of time. So one of you asked about Power Apps and Power Automate. This is where they are. Okay, they are visuals. So you can embed a Power App into a report. You can also use Power Automate with Power BI. And they're built in as standard visualizations. Now, when you are done, you're going to share it via publishing. Now, I have already published this, so I'm signed in up here at the top. You have to sign in to your identity on the service. I'm signed in already. Okay, I can tell that if I come up here to the top right-hand corner. And again, I won't be able to, it's not zooming, but that's okay. So if I wanted to publish this now, if it was ready for prime time, I would come in here and I'd hit publish. Okay, as I said, I've already published this because that can take a minute. So I want to just go out to the service now. So all I'm doing, let me see if I can zoom. So I'm just going to go out to the service and I'm going to hope it's going to take me to the right account. Now, if you do not have a pro license or a premium license, the only place you are going to be able to store something is in my workspace. So you have to have a pro license or a premium license in order to be able to publish. Now, apologies, guys, because it took me into the wrong account. Of course it did. So just bear with me 1 second, and I will at least get to the service before our time ends. And then I'm happy to stay on a couple minutes just to finish that thought, but I know some of you may not be able to get there, so just bear with me. 1 second. There we go. All right, let me see if I can get into, oh, that's not what I wanted. I was about to put all that stuff out there. That's not going to help. Okay, now let me get into, and if you're wondering, if you're wondering what I'm doing, all I'm doing is logging into the service. The easiest way is to open a browser window and then just type in app.powerbi.com. Okay, the other way to do it is just go to your Office 365 environment. Okay, and I'm just logging in, so you're not missing anything. I'm just getting in here. And of course, this being Microsoft, it takes 16,000 minutes here. Oh, yeah. It didn't. Oh, yay. Okay, hold on. So let me drag this over there. Okay, come on, you can do it. Okay. There we go. It's coming. All right, there we go. So now I'm in the service, okay? Power BI, this is the white box. We went through the green box, the yellow box, and now we're in the white box. And I'm going to come over here to workspaces. Okay, over here, I'm on the left-hand side. Go to workspaces, and I'm going to go to the workspace where I published it. Now, you can belong to multiple workspaces. Okay, so I'm going to go into the one where I published this, and I'll find my report, and we'll take a look at it. Okay, so I use this to train people on, and let me just tell you, I haven't cleaned it up in a minute, so I'm going to have to get in here and clean it up at some point, but this is probably pretty realistic as far as what a workspace can look like. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to open up one of these reports. So remember, workspace can store reports, dashboards, Excel content, data flows, and the data set itself. So the blue icon, whenever you see a blue icon, that's a report. So I'm just going to go ahead and open this report. It's not the same one we were just looking at, but again, it does the trick. Okay, so let me actually get back to something else. All right, so here is a report. And I have a slicer. And again, like I said, guys, this is not the same report we were just looking at, but it doesn't really matter. When you get into your report, you are going to be able to interact with your report the same way that you can interact with it in the Power BI desktop. The only difference is now it's read-only, so anybody in the workspace can have access to it. And I can get in here and I can, look at things. I can interact with things. I can click on things, and I can, get all the visuals to interact together to show me what I'm looking for. Last thing I want to show you, second to last thing. Hold on. I want to go back and I want to show you a dashboard because, again, I made the point that a dashboard is. And I'm just navigating on the left-hand side here to get back to my training workspace. And where is my There's my dashboard. So I just click on my dashboard. And again, this is a single virtual page. That's all this is. Okay, so you can see here I've got a bunch of stuff on this dashboard because I just add to it as I teach. But a real dashboard is probably only going to have a couple of visuals. And each of these visuals can come from a separate report that's been published into the workspace. If I were to click on one of these visuals, it would take me back to the report. Remember, these are intended to be static. Last thing, because it's at 1:34, so last thing is I'm using my left-hand navigation again over here. So navigating inside the service, you use your left-hand navigation, and I'm going to go to apps. And you can see that I have an app for the training workspace, okay, which is where I published that. And every workspace can have one and only one app. And then over here on the right-hand side, you can see what has been published in here. Now, I only have one report in here, but I could have multiple reports in here. I could have multiple dashboards in here. And the nice thing about this is that nobody can do anything but view it. Okay, so again, this is all about making the content accessible to people in a safe, secure manner. And behind the scenes, you could be working on the next update of this report without disrupting what people are looking at. So they're still looking at whatever you've published, and you in the background, behind the scenes, can continue to work on all the updates to the reports and stuff. And that is the whirlwind tour. And I apologize, I ran 6 minutes over, so I don't know if that killed anybody's schedule. I apologize
No,
for that.
this is great stuff. I saw Mary asked, do you like to use the Q&A feature?
Um, yes and no. what I tell, sorry, that's my 16-year-old dog barking because he thinks I'm not anywhere near him and I'm right here. Um, um, yeah, I tell clients Q&A is something great to do once you've got all the fundamentals. I don't try to focus on that initially. So people have enough trouble getting their, learning the data model, learning DAX and so on. So yes, but I think it's a feature that goes down. Um, I think it's a feature that they shouldn't tackle before they've got sort of the basics in place. And I see a comment, this interface has been updated since the last time I looked at it. Absolutely. It updates every month except November and December. So yes, it is a rapidly changing product. Okay, other questions, comments? I'm happy to stay on, but I realize I ran
You
over,
are
so I
a
want to be
wealth of
respectful.
information, Jessica. I can keep you here all day asking questions.
Well, I'm happy to come back and chat with you
I
guys
would
if you
love
want
that.
to set up some training, whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm deep in the weeds on Power BI. Again, it's just one of those things that you have to make a commitment
Yeah.
to these products,
Yeah.
and like Power Apps.
Yeah.
You know what? I took the PL 100 class exam and I passed it, and then I went, I just don't know that I have it in me to really get as good in Power Apps as I would want to be. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
because you guys know it takes effort, takes time,
Yeah. It's an investment.
knowledge.
Yep. It's an investment.
It's an investment.
Yep.
It's an investment, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, so absolutely, I want to do a follow up with you if you're willing. It's been an honor having you on the show. I love your teaching style and everything. Love for you to be a part of our accelerator community. I'll send you a link for that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so thanks so much.
And anybody,
For some reason, YouTube thinks you're going to like this video next. Let's see if they're right. Or you can select this playlist, which I've selected for you based on the content you're currently watching. Guys, gotta hurry. Click one of them. Otherwise, YouTube's going to autoplay some other video. But you probably don't.